Hey guys, here again for Opus 8 rulings this time. Sorry it took a little bit longer than usual just because the process to get official rulings is a little bit more cumbersome these days, but I won't get into that. The reason I've got these cards up on the screen at the moment, I just want to remind everyone that auto abilities never have costs. Even if the effect looks like something that would be in a cost, like paying CP or removing cards from your top of your deck or sending your cards from the field to the break zone, just because that looks like something that would be in a cost, auto abilities don't have costs. So any of that happens in an auto ability will always be a resolution. So, in Cloud's case, if you decide to revive him, you remove 10 from top of your deck at resolution. In Luna Freya's case, it will trigger every single time one of your forwards goes to the break zone during your opponent's turn. But if you decide to resolve it, you'll send it at resolution. Time Mage, discard it at resolution, so your opponent doesn't see what cost you're discarding until it's too late. Stuff like that. But yeah, just remember, auto abilities don't have costs. Everything that happens in an auto ability happens at resolution, besides targeting, obviously. Undead Princess and Sakura, this is a reminder again. Costs have to be paid with your own cards. I'll keep bringing that up because it does still come up every single Opus. Put 2 Earth backups into the break zone is your own backups because it's a cost. It's before the colon. Sakura, Dull 5 active lightning backups has to be your own active lightning backups. Bahamut and Raiden, they can be cheated into play with effects that let you cast a summon for free. So Bahamut you can cast with, say, Tuna from the deck. Both of them you can cast with Legend Minnow, for example. Cheating them into play, bypassing the cost, does bypass the restriction as well. Madine and Arc, on the other hand, cheating them into play does not bypass the restriction on when you can cast them. So if you have an effect that lets you cast a summon during your opponent's turn, you can't use that to cast Madine or Arc during your opponent's turn. An example is Seymour Special, if one of these is on top of your deck. That's it for generic ones. Now on to specific rulings. Now this one I'm really happy about, because this rule is actually in the advanced rules because I brought up Inconsistencies with Zodiac to Kageyama on Twitter. If you take multiple damage at the same time, you take all the damage first, then resolve the EXs one at a time. So if there's an EX on the first damage, you don't resolve it until you've taken the second damage, then you resolve that EX, and then if second was EX, do that after. Also, if you do damage to someone who's on 6 with Archangel HM, you do actually do damage, and you do put them to 8 damage. However, it's recorded as 7 for tiebreakers, so it doesn't really matter at this point. Errata. You have to control the fire character when its ability... If it uses an ability that deals damage, you have to control the character when the ability resolves for it to do the extra 1000. This is actually super relevant for stuff that sacrifices itself as a cost. So stuff like Bomb and a lot of the fire backups. They actually won't get the buff from Errata if they sacrifice themselves as a cost, because when the ability resolves, you don't control that fire character anymore. And that's just like Papalima and Yida. If you break Yida in response to its ability, then it won't get the 2000 extra damage from Papalima's effect, because Papalima says a Yida you control. Exactly the same thing here. Cloud. You must remove 10 cards to revive him. You can't revive him if you don't have 10 cards to remove from your deck. Warrior, multiple instances of its ability do work the way you want it to. So if you resolve its ability twice, it will deal 4000 extra damage. If you resolve its ability 3 times, it will deal 6000 extra damage, and so on. Lava Spider is a field ability, so it doesn't enter the stack, it doesn't trigger. Also, it doesn't last until end of turn, so it just means that while your forwards are attacking, they have 3000 extra power. Once the attack is over, which is after damage step, they will go back down to the power they had before Lava Spider. Also, because it's a field ability, it comes into effect before on-attack effects are triggered. So something like Rom's Legendary, whose effect only triggers if he has 1000 or more power when he attacks, will actually work with Lava Spider if he's less than 1000, but then goes over 1000 with Lava Spider. That does trigger his auto ability. Umaro's auto ability. If you have 0 cards in hand, you don't have to pay 1 ICP. The ability doesn't know that you have 0 cards in hand and force you to pay. It just... If you don't pay, it'll attempt to make you discard. If you have 0, that's fine. You have effectively bypassed the drawback by having nothing in hand. Scale Toad. At the end of your opponent's turn, auto ability triggers at the start of their end phase. So it will stack with other auto abilities that trigger at the end of turn. Also, it resolves before hand size is checked. So if they end their turn with 6 cards in hand, Scale Toad will force them to discard down to 5, and then they won't have to discard again because they are now below the hand limit. Squall. 2 things here. That first auto ability, because it has no targets, it only triggers if it meets the condition. So If they have no dull forwards when he enters, you've effectively missed the chance for that ability. So you wouldn't, for example, be able to, you know, stack his ability to dull something and then have that let his first ability resolve, because the first ability didn't even go on the stack in the first place. They have to have a dull forward when he enters for that ability to trigger. His second ability, you can't discard down to 0 in order to use the ability, like by paying the cost, because if you have any cards in hand, you can't even attempt to activate that ability in the first place. So to use that ability, you will have to use entirely backup CP, because if you have any cards in hand, you can't even attempt to activate it. Dark Fina. This is just like the other like modal effects, like Diabolus, Glacial Bolus, all of those. If you both effects trigger, so you're on 5 more damage, just like 2 of the actions, they will both combine into one effect, so they'll take up 1 item on the stack, and they will resolve in order. So if you wish, you can cast the summon that you search for with Dark Fina. Lastwell. His auto ability does have a target, which is any forward, which means it'll trigger regardless if that forward is damaged or not. So in Lastwell's case, you can then stack, you can target an undamaged forward and stack his action ability to deal at 1000 damage, and then when the auto ability resolves, it will be damaged at that point, so it will dull and freeze it. His special ability, a couple of things here. Unlike Meteor and Bloodfest and effects that deal damage to multiple targets, because only one target is taking the damage, you decide which target takes damage and which target gets dulled and frozen at resolution. An example of a similar card is Raiden. You would choose which one is broken and which one is removed at resolution, because it's not, you're not choosing which targets take damage, you're choosing which targets have which effect applied to them. Secondly, if one of the targets is illegal because it becomes either untargetable or is removed from the field or whatever, when it resolves, it has to deal 8,000 to the remaining one. You can't choose to dull and freeze the remaining target. It has to do 8,000 first. Garland, his first auto ability. You can select a character that can't be dulled by opponent's summons or abilities. So if your opponent selects Guy or Yang, for example, then nothing will happen. That's possible even though they can't be affected by the effect, and that's just like selecting your Gilgamesh starter when your opponent's Schrodinger reveals a monster, which forces you to bounce forward. Even though it can't be affected by that effect, you can still select it, and then nothing will happen. So that's effectively a way to dodge the effect, so to speak. Shilada. She has errata. The official text is on the screen, so that's not the printed text, but that is the official text. It basically means that while you are generating CP, for whatever reason, you can put Shilada into the break zone, and one of that CP will be paid for by Shilada, and that can be any color. So, that can even be for a 1-cost card. So you can play a 1-cost card by simply sacrificing Shilada without doing anything else for the cost. With Shilada, if you have 5 backups, including Shilada, you can't play a 6th backup by sacrificing Shilada as part of the cost, even though you would, of course, only have 5 backups when that all finishes. At the time that you're trying to play the backup, it sees that you already have 5, and it sees itself as the 6th and won't let you play it. So that's not even a legal play in the first place, so you don't even get to the point of paying CP cost. And that's just like Legendary Kefka. You can't sacrifice a Kefka to play the Legendary Kefka because you already have Kefka in play. The other thing is, the CP she generates does count as backup CP. So if you have, for example, 3 backups, including Shilada, you can dull all 3 of them and sacrifice Shilada to play something like the new Raiden or Bahamut. Selkie. Type. If both cards are of the same type, that means forward, backup, summon, or monster. So what it means is if they mill 2 forwards, then you draw a card. If they mill 2 backups, you draw a card, etc. Death Gaze. Go look at my rulings on Dorgan in the Opus 7 rulings. There's quite a few of them, but I'm not going to go through all of them again. Fina. That first part of her ability is actually an additional cost. Unlike anything we've really seen before, we haven't seen an additional cost like that before. The only similar thing is Kefka's alternate cost. But yeah, what that means is that when you play her, if you opt to do the extra effect, then you will pay 9 total to play her, 4 of which has to be win CP, because you'll have to generate 3 win CP for the additional cost, and also the 1 win CP required to play Fina as a wind card. But that is paid as 1 packet of 9 CP with at least 4 wind. That's the main thing there. So most cards with those kind of effects, they usually are something like, you know, when it enters, you may pay this much to do this, and that kind of thing, but this is not like that. This actually changes her cost if you decide to do it. Archangel TT. when it resolves, it creates a delayed auto-ability. That delayed auto-ability doesn't care whether the forward is dull, and it doesn't care whether Archangel TT is in play or not. So for this ability to resolve, the forward has to be dull, but once the Archangel TT's auto-ability has resolved, from that point on, that forward is destined to break, regardless whether it's dull at that time, and regardless whether Archangel TT is in play at that time. Gladiolus, his cost restriction there, you can only pay with Earth CP. That is like Emperor Zand, not like White Tiger, let's see, Nimbus, and there's other ones. So in this case, you can actually cheat him in with stuff like Tama and Devout, those kind of cards, because it's worded like Zand, not the other ones, like the Estinian as well. Nacht. That XX in the cost, you are choosing to pay an amount, which is an even number, because it'll be, you know, double of whatever you've decided X to be. So if you decide X to be 1, then you're paying 2. If you decide X to be 3, you're paying 6, and so on. And that is paid as a total. So that is a total cost if you choose 3 for X, for example. That is a total cost of 6, so you can pay that like you would normally pay 6. So you can discard 3 cards, for example, to pay the 6. You don't have to pay like 2 separate lots of 3 or something like that. And that's just like how, you know, costs to have a number and like some element symbols or whatever, like, you know, 3 fire, 3 colorless, that can be paid as just 6 fire CP, for example. So yeah, you don't have to pay the 2 X's separately. They combine to create 1 cost. Fenrir. This is like Fina. I just want to point it out again. That is an actual additional cost, so it is not like Bahamut Fury. It is, if you choose to pay the extra 2, that is the extra 2 to cast Fenrir from your hand. And that also means things that cheat summons into play, for example, you won't be able to get that benefit with Fenrir. You won't be able to gain the extra, you know, pay the extra 2 and do the extra remove instead of break if you cheat Fenrir in, because you don't even get a chance to pay the extra cost because you're not hard casting it. Librarian. You can't get back other removed from play cards, only cards removed by Librarian. You also can't get back cards that were removed by a different Librarian. So each Librarian can only get back the cards that were removed by that Librarian. And if you go to more than 5 cards in your hand with Librarian's effect, you will have to discard down to... you have to discard for hand size at the end of your turn. And also, because that triggers in the end phase, say you have 5 cards and you add 1 in the end phase, so you go to 6. Because you're in end phase, you can't manually activate, you know, summons or abilities and stuff like that. Only auto abilities will trigger. So if you, for example, added a summon back as the 6th card, you wouldn't then be able to try and cast it, so you don't have 6. Alba, her auto ability. You have to choose the exact amount of targets as Warrior's Darkness you control. It's not up to. So if your opponent doesn't have enough legal targets, then you can't even use it at all. However, when it resolves, it doesn't care anymore how many Warriors of Darkness you control. So say you did trigger it, you targeted 3 because you have 3 Warriors of Darkness. If one of them dies before it resolves, it will still dull all 3 targets, because only the amount of targets cares how many Warriors of Darkness you control. The actual effect doesn't care. Death Machine. The opponent's forward, you choose it and it breaks. Your forward, you don't choose it and it gets put into the break zone. That's just a fairly important distinction. It's like, I don't need to explain the difference between those. I've done it plenty of times, but just make sure you know that. Also, the end phase ability triggers during the end phase, which means your opponent can't respond. So if you choose their forward, they can't then respond with, say, Titan to make it unbreakable, because they can't actually manually activate someone's auto abilities during the end phase, just like with Librarian. The first ability, where it kills itself, that is an auto ability. So it triggers at the start of main phase 1, which means you can respond to it. It triggers in both players' turn, by the way. But yeah, either player can respond to that ability because it's in the main phase. So if it triggers, so it will only trigger if there's no forwards in play. But if it triggers and you respond with something that puts a forward in play, then it won't resolve. So you can actually, you know, have that trigger and then, say, transform a monster, and then you now control a forward. When it resolves, it won't kill itself. Quina. Since that is a cost, remove the top 5 cards in your deck from the game, you have to have at least 5 to do it. You can't say only have 4 and like remove them all to do it. Shamond P. Grouch. Now this is a damage modifier, so it's not like Minwu, for example, but it is a new type of damage modifier, a damage canceller. It's the only one of its kind, but it has the same timing as damage modifiers. So as we know, if multiple damage modifiers apply to a damage packet, then the owner of the forward who's going to take that damage decides which order to apply the modifiers. in this case with Shamond, once you apply Shamond to the damage packet, the damage becomes 0, and all the other damage modifiers no longer apply, because by making the damage become 0, there is effectively no longer a damage packet there to modify. This is different to when damage modifiers reduce the damage to 0 or less. In those cases, the other modifiers will still apply to that damage packet, and they can actually increase it back up above 0. So I'm going to use Chelinka and Alhanalem as examples. So Chelinka by herself, if she resolves on your forward, and you have Shamond P. Grouch, you can... That's 1000 damage, so Shamond P. Grouch applies. Also, Chelinka's damage modifier applies, which increases the damage by 1000. You can apply Shamond first, make the 1000 0, and then Chelinka's modifier won't apply anymore, because Shamond has actually removed the damage packet, effectively. However, if they use... Say you have a Warrior of Light, the one that reduces damage by 2000, and they target your Warrior of Light with Alhanalem while they have Chelinka. So Alhanalem wants to do 2000, Warrior of Light wants to reduce it by 2000, Chelinka wants to increase it by 1000. If you apply Warrior of Light first, the damage will go from 2000 to 0, but it didn't become 0, it just got reduced to 0. So Chelinka's modifier will still apply to that and increase it back up to 1000. So in that case, your forward will still take 1000 damage, but in the case of Chelinka's auto-ability against Shamond P. Grouch, your forward will not take any damage at all. Paladin. Square Enix are having fun with damage modifiers this set, so I'll get to that in a second. But with Paladin, if this is resolved on a forward, if the forward's about to receive a damaging effect, only the damage is redirected. Everything else about the effect stays the same. So for example, something like Sid Reigns, for example, if your forward's about to take 4000 damage from Sid Reigns' effect, and its Paladin has been used, and you're going to redirect that damage somewhere else, your forward obviously won't take the 4000, the forward that you decide to take 4000 will. However, the effect where if the forward dies, discard a card, that will still be applied to the original target, because that was part of Sid Reigns' effect on your target, and that target is still the same forward. It's just not the one that took the damage. So if that forward dies to something else, then you will still discard a card. Whereas if the forward that took the 4000 that you redirected dies, you won't discard a card. It's the same with stuff like Bahamut, the Opus 4 one, the Opus 1 one, where, you know, deal 10,000 damage to forwards if they go to the break zone this turn and remove from the game instead. If you use that on a forward and then you redirect the 10,000 to a different forward, that forward that you redirected it to won't get removed because that wasn't the one that was the target. So that doesn't have that kind of thing applied to it, where if it gets broken that turn removed from the game, that's still applied to the original target, even though that target wasn't the one that took the damage. Now for the really fun part. So this is also applied like a damage modifier. So you can actually do some really weird stuff where if you've got a forward that's about to take some damage and it's got, you know, a few damage modifiers lined up, if Paladin is one of those, you could say, for example, your Warrior of Light is about to take some damage and you've had Paladin resolve on it. You can reduce the damage by 2000, then redirect the damage to somewhere else. So you're actually kind of gaining the benefit of the damage modifier, but applying the damage to a different forward. And similarly, if the damage is increased, if for whatever reason your warrior, the one that takes double damage, is targeted, you could double the damage and then redirect the damage to something else. But yeah, basically just remember that it's applied like a damage modifier, so you get to put it wherever you want, but also everything else about the effect that did the damage, everything else besides the damage stays the same. Oh, and the last thing, sorry, field abilities that like negate damage, so to speak, or, you know, prevent damage, like Minwu and Ishtola and all those, they apply last, as we know, after damage modifiers, so they don't care about it until, you know, the forward takes the damage. So if you have your Ishtola targeted by a summon that does damage, you can redirect the damage, and then the new forward will take the damage because that's not protected by Ishtola's thing. However, if you have a forward that is going to take damage, and then you redirect that to Ishtola, so that forward's going to take damage from a summon or ability, and you redirect it to Ishtola, then she won't take the damage because that is summon or ability damage, and she doesn't take that. One last thing. If an AoE effect is redirected, so say Pelennor, all forwards take 1000 damage. If you redirect one packet of that, so 1000 to a different forward, so one forward takes 2000 damage from Pelennor, it is treated as one packet of 2000, not two separate packets. So for something like Untitled, for example, if you redirect a second Pelennor packet to him, it'll just be treated as one. It's 2000, he'll only trigger once. He won't trigger once for each 1000. That's I'm pretty sure, hopefully that covers everything with this card. It's probably not going to see play, so it probably doesn't even matter, but there's just a lot of weird niche scenarios with it. I hope that has helped. Ninja. If you take control of a forward in combat, you remove it from combat. So just like Riku's escape special ability, it's no longer attacking or blocking, and there's no damage calculation or anything. The next step will be back to attack preparation, regardless which step you're up to currently, whether that be attack step, block step. Melted Gemini. It doesn't remove buffs that have already resolved. For example, like Monk, if their fort's already gained 3,000 power for a Monk, if you play Melted Gemini after that, then it won't take away the 3,000 that's already there. However, of course, if Melted Gemini is on the field and Monk resolves, it will just do nothing. Obviously, it stops field abilities though, so, you know, regardless how long Maria or an Anthem backup's being in play, once you play Melted Gemini, that no longer applies. Also, it doesn't prevent power becoming a higher value. So, for example, if you have a forward with 1,000 base power and it gets targeted by the Diablos, that makes a forward's power become 4,000. Even though it is going from 1,000 base power to 4,000 base power, its power will actually increase. Melted Gemini doesn't prevent it because it's not actually being increased by the summoner ability, it's just becoming a different value. Luna Freya. I talked about this in the first bit, I'll drill it in again. Auto abilities do not have costs, so if you put Luna Freya into the break zone, that will be at resolution. One of the main things that means is that if Luna Freya gets cancelled by Y'shtola, which it can, so your forward goes to the break zone, she triggers, it gets cancelled by Y'shtola, then again, Luna Freya won't go to the break zone, you won't even get the chance to send to the break zone because that ability won't resolve. That's the main thing there. You can revive monsters that are being treated as forwards, so if your monster that's currently being treated as a forward dies on your opponent's turn, you can trigger, Luna Freya will trigger. When it resolves, you can send it to the break zone, bring that monster back into play. However, it will be only a monster. It won't still be a forward as well, and that's just like Calbrena and her own ability. When she gets revived, she revives as a monster, not still as a forward, because it's a new instance of the card. Last thing, if you have control of your opponent's forward, so you're not the owner, and that forward dies, Luna Freya will trigger, and you can resolve it, but if you resolve it, it will enter on its owner's side, because when characters enter play, they enter play on their owner's side by default. Arc. You only draw for forwards that go to 0 or less directly caused by Arc. So actually the forwards that you draw for, at the time that Arc is resolving and you draw the cards, they're actually not dead yet, even though they're at 0 or less. They actually die due to the rules process that happens directly after Arc resolves. But what that means, say for example you have Laguna, the 4k Laguna, and a Squall, who's normally 6k but he goes up 3k where you control Laguna, so he's 9k at the moment. If Arc resolves, Laguna goes to negative 4,000, Squall goes to 1,000. So Arc sees the negative 4,000, you draw a card for that one, but it sees Squall at 1,000 at that time, so you don't draw for that. Then the rules process happens, which kills Laguna for being less than 0 power. And then obviously Squall will drop because Laguna's died, and then he will also get killed off by the rules process. But that wasn't Arc that caused him to go to 0 or less, so you don't draw for the Squall in that case. Lice. At 5 or more damage, she does buff herself as well as your other characters, even though she doesn't buff herself at less than 5 damage. As for her field ability, that first ability there, where her name is, it's not treated as Yida, you just can't play Yida while she's in play. If her ability is removed, so if she doesn't have that ability currently, which can happen from stuff like Dancer, Minerva, or whatever, you can play Yida, because there's nothing stopping you doing that. They don't share a name. And in that case, when the ability comes back, nothing will happen either, because there's no name clash. Like, again, they're different names. So that there is actually a way to have Lice and Yida in play at the same time if you manage to remove Lice's abilities and then play Yida while you're allowed. Just a little funny thing you can do there. Anyway, I think that's everything. So thank you very much, as usual, everyone for watching. Yeah, everyone for supporting. And also, I've noticed on Facebook recently there's been a lot more people talking about rulings, discussing rulings, you know, the whole like brain teaser phase, stuff like that. You know, it's great to see people actually getting excited about this stuff and actually talking about it and clearing things up. So that's awesome. I love this community. Thanks, as always. Cheers for watching.